But one thing I want to bring up is basically that people are seeing also that you can't trust these boys with their toys, right? Basically, if they have rubber bullets, they misuse them, right? If they have guns with rubber bullets, they misuse them. If they have tear gas, they misuse it. So what the heck are we doing with seeing them parading around with tanks and military weapons that we know they can in a pinch be
Right.
trusted with?
There's no
It's a,
reason they have
yeah.
that.
Except
Plus,
it's another pipeline for profit for the military industrial complex, right? I mean,
exactly.
we have another, every police department in the country is now suddenly a potential client of course, everyone in Congress that profits from military industrial complex, which is most of them. And of course, all these corporations want that, right?
And plus, the police are only required to meet a minimum threshold for use of force. That's like if
Right.
you went to if you went for brain surgery, would you want your doctor just to use the minimum they had to do without being sued for malpractice? I mean, you
Right.
know, like it's not they're not holding themselves to a super high professional standard. It's just like they're trying to see how much they can get away with. And I'm not saying all police are like this, but there's a culture, there's a systematic problem, and there's no question about it. It's not just the bad apples metaphor. It's really it's like the whole way it's run, and the militarization of the police is a big part of the problem. I mean, because you have these tools, you're going to use them, right? You have a hammer, every problem's going to
That's it.
look like a nail.
I mean, these folks that basically, we can talk about the psychology of people that would be interested in getting into a police force anyway, a certain percentage of them anyway, right? But they have these weapons in a locker, right? And it's like a 12-year-old with that toy gun that mom took away because he was misbehaving. He can't wait to get his hands on that, right? He got a chance to use it on the range once, and he can't wait to play with that. And that's why the police are, I think.
And they're weapons of war,
They're weapons of war.
tear gas is a
Yeah,
chemical weapon. Why are we using chemical weapons against
right.
peaceful protesters in U.S. cities? I mean, when people saw that on their TV screens, they said, "Hey, wait a minute, this is going too far. You
Right.
can't. Our taxpayer dollars cannot support this." I mean, that's what the Minneapolis City Council didn't even. I don't think they really knew what was going on until they saw this happening. And Derek
Right.
Chauvin, even if he's convicted of murder, he's still going to collect like $1 million in pension because it's part of the contract.
Oh, wow.
I
Yeah.
mean, what's wrong with this picture, right?
Yeah. So I'm afraid I'm going to switch to, the other side a little bit and say that I do really disagree with the terminology that people have been putting out there, defund the police. I think you really need communication is key here, because I'm really afraid that has sold a lot of guns. I'm afraid that a lot of people in different areas and people that are barely paying attention to what the real issues are and this and that are saying the crazy liberals are gonna get rid of get rid of the police, and they're out there buying guns.
I mean, it's a
I
catchy
really
term.
don't think that's a good thing.
It's a catchy term, but it's unfortunate because I don't think people are really
Yeah.
talking about defunding the police. They're talking about defunding police violence. A taxpayer dollar should not be used to pay
Yeah.
for gratuitous police brutality and violence. That's the thing. So I mean, and
Yeah.
they're talking about not that there's no need for any kind of a police department or policing. I mean, obviously you need
Right.
that because you're going to have crime and you're going to have car accidents. You're going to have different things happen. You have to have some kind of police. But the question is, defund the police as it currently exists, as the dysfunctional system. As it currently exists, and then build it up from the ground. So I think defund the police is overly simplistic, and obviously it's going to be attacked by any of the law and order types, right, as being just anarchy, right? If we have no police, we're going to have just mayhem. And I think that's really not what it's about. Because if you look at what Minnesota is doing, what Minneapolis is doing, and what Camden did, they didn't defund their police. They defunded certain aspects of the police. Camden, they worked with
Right.
NYU and came up with a system of basically 6 basic steps or basic principles that police are not encouraged but are required to follow. Things like not to use violence except as an absolute, or not to use force even except as an absolute last resort. So there's certain rules that just, and that's very unusual. So I
Right.
think moving in that direction, people could support that. And I think defund the police obviously is I think it has become a little bit more uh, nuanced than just simplistic. We're not going to pay for the police anymore.
Yeah, you want to demilitarize them. You want to have local civilians on discipline boards. I don't know, and also code of conduct, as you're alluding to, right? Basically, like there's a certain a level of force you can use, and though I would hope that not not being able to use excessive force would essentially be the rule of the day everywhere, but it gets overlooked one way or the other, I guess, right?
I mean, how many homeless people are killed every year by police because they said, well, they were holding a knife and they held a knife up? Are they really a threat? And in
Right,
Camden, the rates of police instigated force have gone way down as a result of these reforms.
right,
Yeah, every year there's like 13 or 1400 people are killed by the police, and maybe some are justified, but you look at the UK, it's like 14 for a year. You know,
right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
100 times, and we're a bigger country, but still 100 times as many people are killed here. Our prison population is um, uh, highest per capita and highest in just numbers of any country.
Yeah.
If you did it by state, by how many prisoners are in each state, the top 31 of our states would be the top prison populations in the world. Compared to
Right.
other countries, like.
Of, I mean, of course, it is completely different, like in Europe and England, right? Because if you watch any like crime shows on from like based in England or something like that, it's like, uh-oh, we got to get the gun, and so they have to go through a security procedure to go to back to the station and unlock something and sign something out, and then they get the gun that they're allowed to take with them. It's like, and here we just have obviously a huge starting problem is all the guns everywhere. Oh yeah,
So, two things that I wanted to touch upon was, one was the fact that we seem to constantly be suffering by this sloganeering, and again, it just comes back to these like photo ops and just these opportunities to it's like this whole convenience thing, where now it's like what you were saying, defund the police, right? Before that it was abolish ICE, and the majority of these people who are actually talking about these things, they have no understanding about what they're actually talking about, because they don't know where anything comes from. They don't know how things are made. They don't know how things run. They don't know the mechanisms behind anything. They just know that it's this cool line that somebody keeps saying, and then that's what I want to do, right? But in actuality, something like defunding the police, or like what you guys were saying, that it's defunding the violence against the civilians and all that kind of stuff. We do have to, the reason why we have gotten to the place that we've gotten to is because we have become complacent and we have allowed for these things to happen, right? This whole thing of using tear gas against the citizens, and using water cannons, and you doing psyops and all these kind of things, these are all things that have been used on American citizens, but because it's not front and center, because it's not something that actually affects most people, they don't care. These things have been happening. Again, we've talked about this, how these things have been happening overseas and no one has cared, right?
Mm.
But now all of a sudden everybody cares. Now all of a sudden, because it's happening to your neighbors, then it's becoming your problem, which it seems like that is a plague that we have, that we always have to wait until we're reactionary. We always have to wait for it to happen to us in order for us to actually want to change something. The only way that real change, real reform can come about is if the citizenry actually takes accountability and responsibility for their own neighborhoods, for their own communities. As long as we want to pay for the convenience of having some sort of outside source to be able to take care of a problem for us, then we're always going to have this problem. And it can be
sure.
used in pretty much every aspect of life, right? But obviously we're talking about policing right now. But yeah, the reason, like, think about the training The fact that you have these officers that go to Israel, or that you have Israeli soldiers that come here, or and train the police officers on on surveillance and all of, counterterrorism measures, essentially, but here at home. That sets a very dangerous precedent. No one
Yeah,
wants to.
my understanding is that the cop actually leaning on that guy's neck, that was essentially an Israeli military move of some kind.
It's
The
it's
way,
it's
the
it's
specific way
it's
he was doing it.
it's like Krav Maga, right? It's the Israeli martial arts. Um,
Oh,
But
okay,
even
yeah, yeah,
people that do martial arts, they talk about how you can't have that that's a very sensitive area for people, that you can't apply that sort of pressure. I mean, I don't think that he necessarily went out of his way to go and murder this guy. Like, he was like, I'm gonna press down on his neck until he dies. I think it's just that disregard, because
yeah.
you lose that personhood. You lose the fact that that person is a being, a sentient being who has needs just like you, and who breathes, who eats, who has family. All of these things get
right.
tossed to the side because they need to get home safe at
So
the end of the
like
day. That's it.
Nina Turner says, we don't just need a change in policing. We
No,
need a change of heart. So we need a change
no.
of attitude. That's the whole thing. Like, why is this guy thinking that? Why is he uh, leaning on this guy's neck and feeling like he's expendable, and they
Right.
can't get me because I'm
And
Right,
protected.
right. Again, that's
and
because we are paying for the convenience of, have they over there. We're setting that barrier. They go and take care of this problem. I don't need to take care of this. I'm safe
What's the
because.
problem? What's the problem? This guy tried to pay for using a $20 counterfeit bill. Is that the problem? I mean,
well,
what problem is he protecting us from?
You're talking about Derek Chauvin? What is
Yeah,
he
yeah. I'm
protecting
just
us from?
saying, like, why would people feel like they had to be protected from a guy trying to? I mean, obviously the store
right.
Well,
owner.
that's in a sense, that's poverty, right? They have criminalized poverty.
Well, see,
Um,
I actually see that like Floyd is like it's a perfect example for folks to worry about police overreaction, because whatever, what he happened to be black, but I can inadvertently pass a counterfeit bill. If I get a 20 back from this guy, I'm going to I'm not going to examine it. I'm going to use it. It's something that anybody could do. Absolutely anybody. They're not saying he has a printing press and he printed off these phony bills. He received it and he passed it on. So it's really it really is wonderful that it's gotten so much attention, that I think people are just seeing this is really horrific. And yeah, obviously there's, it is seen in the light of him being black. Probably chances are, of course, if it was a white guy, he wouldn't have done that, because he wouldn't have felt able to do that.
Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
whole thing. It's like it
yeah,
goes back to this history of, like, the slave patrols and the militias and everything like that. I mean, the police
right.
have this historic foundation in that legacy, of oppression, and I
Right.
think that's the whole thing. That's so.
Well, what you were talking about was the fact that they have criminalized poverty, right? Because they will do that to somebody who passed a counterfeit bill, which is, what kind of crime is that? But then these
Exactly.
people who have, pulled this heist on the American public,
Right.
with this upward transfer of wealth, you don't see them going and getting,
Yeah.
picked up by the police and, being thrown to the ground and all these kind of things, because they're just not seen as dangerous. It's always been this whole thing of white collar crime versus blue collar crime, right?
True.
Right.
There's always been this disparity.
But they're much more
Yes. Yeah.
destructive. The
Yeah.
effects of what they do is much more destructive than obviously passing a counterfeit $20 bill, because
Absolutely.
For
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
But again, it's something that when you pay for that convenience, it's kind of like when you go to a restaurant, right? And when you cook something, you put this effort into it, and you just like, or when you go to this local restaurant that you have a relationship with the owner, and you have a relationship with the wait staff, and you want to give them more of a tip and all this, you're more involved, right? Whereas if you just go to a McDonald's, you're just, what are you expecting? You're just expecting something quick and fast. It can be shit. It doesn't matter, but you're paying for the convenience, right? And that's what's happening with the same aspect with policing, where you are your tax dollars are going towards paying these pensions and and these salaries for these police officers who are, what are they actually contributing to your society? If anything, it's in a lot of senses it's a detriment,
Right.
right, to the society.
It's making things worse.
But again, you don't care. Why? Because it's over there. It's not something that
Right.
you actually have to. You're not involved in it. You're not involved in community policing. And so that was the second aspect.
Can I get my Moscow
which,
minute in here, because I know
hold
we're
on.
okay.
What the other aspect of what I wanted to say was that, the fact that police are supposed to be serving us, but their community, like, they're not serving their communities because their communities are not delineating what it is that they want to be policed on, which that I think is one of the main reforms that needs to be brought about. Like, I think that it should be something that if the community doesn't want you to police marijuana, well, then guess what? You shouldn't be policing marijuana, because your job is to serve the community. It's not to just to serve your overlords. But yes, go ahead.